Well, thank you all for being here this morning. This is great. And what I wanted to do today, it's not the history of the watershed. I'll do a little short history of the Watershed Association, and then we'll just a brief sort of description of the watershed. And then I wanted to kind of have a discussion, really, and it's taking off on the theme of flows. And the two specific flow type themes is how the river has flowed through the history of mankind as an entity. And then, of course, our most recent thing is, should the river be flowing perennially all the time, or should it be flowing partially, intermittent kind of flows idea? So there's a couple of different things with rivers, as you might expect. I'll do the quick history of the Watershed Association first. So the Santa Fe Watershed Association was founded in 1997 by Page Grant. Specifically, it was founded, by the way, to work with the mining issues going on down by Agua Fria in the river, the gravel mines that were scouring out the river to build highways and things like that. And so those were the initial things. We're a nonprofit 501c3 member-supported organization dealing with education, advocacy, stewardship, and restoration. And so those are our sort of big three. I'm going to back up a little bit. The definition of a watershed, so when I was in school, it was something like, a geography where all the water drains to a single point. And I often tell people it's like when you put water in your hands and they drip out at the bottom, kind of thing. And that's what a watershed does. Only our watershed, and I'll go to the map a little bit, my prop. This is my PowerPoint presentation here. So it starts up here, Lake Peak and Santa Fe Lake, which is just the other side of the ski area. When you're at the ski area on the top there, you look down into Santa Fe River, Santa Fe Lake. And it's a lake. It's a natural body of water, as opposed to, as it flows down to the reservoirs, McClure Reservoir here. There's a couple of McClures in the room, and so this is your reservoir. And then it flows down to Nichols Reservoir, which is just a little ways above Audubon and the Nature Conservancy Canyon Reserve. And then the old 2 Mile Reservoir, which is now just a pond, because that dam was removed in about 1997. 98. Sterling, you may have a better date on that, but anyway, 98, yeah. And then it flows on down through the city, as right through here, and then on down, I'm going to say Agua Fria, Airport Road, La Cienega, La Bajada, and then Cochiti, and then into the Rio Grande. Cochiti Dam actually dammed up the Santa Fe River as well. By the way, and they move things around with that. So the whole watershed's about 124,000 acres. So this sort of is my world in that sense, and for the Watershed Association. But there's a catch. So this may be the surface geography, but the aquifers, for instance, one of the major aquifers, groundwater reservoirs for us is the El Dorado. Starts at near the El Dorado subdivision and flows down into La Cienega and La Cienega area. Inversely, on the north side, we have Tesuque, and that flows down from the Tesuque area into our watershed. So it's kind of like, groundwater management, aquifer management's a big deal, as you might imagine these days, where right now we're getting about 20% of our water from our aquifers. So it becomes a big deal these days, and it's something that we're working on, is trying to get funding for mapping and things like that. But I wanted to go back through sort of why we're here, and this idea of how the river has flowed through history, and not water flows, but imagine so 500 years ago. 400 years ago, the Spanish came and immediately started building acequias and fields and things like that, and houses. which is for us impervious coverage, which causes erosion and things like that, like arroyos, are a large part of function of all the impervious surfaces that we've built. But before the Spanish, there were the pueblos, or the indigenous peoples that were here, and we're talking now 2,000 years ago, or more. And there's some folks here that know more on the history of that than I do. But in those days, where we are standing now, this was all kind of a marshy area. Again, this was all a big wetlands. And so it wasn't exactly something where you could grow corn or maize. You couldn't necessarily live here, or so much of it near the river, because it's sort of like living in a swamp is not fun. It's kind of wet and mucky. So can you imagine what this area was like 4,000 years ago? And imagine it probably as kind of a savanna, we think. It's, in my mind, it was kind of like the grasslands. It is part of the Chihuahuan grasslands. We're in the transition zone of that, with the piñon and juniper. But they were probably more widely spaced. And a lot of that could have been a fire regime that came through the area on a regular basis. Regular being 10 years maybe, or something like that. So imagine this area, including the mountains, by the way, as being kind of an open savanna type of area. And imagine that, you know, like that would be great for deer. You know, they love that sort of stuff, and so do elk. Elk, you know, are a lot of plains animals. I tend to think of elk as, in the mountains, you know, on high meadows and things like that. Well, that's kind of where they were left. But before that, they were in the plains, and of course the bison, the American bison, were around here, and beavers. So imagine that if the Santa Fe River had beaver dams every quarter mile, all the way down through it. Beaver dams are one of those neat things for hydrologists, because they slow up the water and get it to infiltrate. And so with that kind of system, with the beaver dam system, you have a lot more water available at a shallower area beneath the surface. So a lot of plants and crops basically grow a lot easier. And so maize was the classic. So, and I think of this too, you know, that so we had this open area, and the Pueblos came in and they did a lot of planting as well. And then the Spanish came in and they increased it more. And then the Americans came in and they really increased the impervious surfaces, and they started draining wetlands. You know, Thoreau was an engineer, civil engineer, and he drained areas like Walden Pond. You know, and that he didn't drain Walden Pond, but that was his job, you know, was to, and so many of the early engineers in the 1800s were draining wetlands so that they could be planted with crops. So we had the same situation here, that our possibly vibrant wetlands areas were drained so that the people could put in the crops, and that says something in itself. Then the big thing started happening about roughly 1884. The good citizens of Santa Fe decided to build the Old Stone Dam. This is the dam up in Audubon's, Nature Conservancy's Canyon Preserve. It's a neat structure, by the way. Same masons built the dam as built the basilica. So all of a sudden they dammed up the river. And the folks from Agua Fria came running up and said, "Where's our water?" And they just kind of said, "Well, it's ours now." You know, can you imagine this scenario? Like, and of course there was probably a show of force, and so the folks in Agua Fria went back down and took what they could. And then they built more dams. Well, first thing is the Old Stone Dam. I love this story, that filled in one day. Huge monsoonal storm came through on Aztec Springs above that area, above the where the reservoir was, and filled it in with sediment in one day. And they went, "Oops." So then they got serious about building dams. They built the 2 Mile Dam which was later declared unsafe because it was on a earthquake fault. And then they built Nichols and McClure dams after that, going up to 1997 when they added on to them. So dam building has been a big thing in our river and our watershed. And of course, it's unnatural. So did the river run year-round, do you think? I mean, it could have during those wet years, like this past year when we had snowpack going on in the upper watershed, as we call it. And those could have been going on for 20-year periods. It wasn't a 4-year drought. It was 20 years of wet weather, sort of thing. Imagine again, how the river flows would have been affected by that. So the river flows have been intermittent because of the dams and because of the changing weather. And so those have been, fairly well documented, if you will. I think, though, the biggest thing that's affected water in our river is population. And so that's been the challenge. People can remember, when the river flowed year-round. I mean, people like now alive, our current populace, but no one seems to remember when the river stopped running. And I couldn't tell you. I mean, there was no documentation. No one wrote down, oh, the river stopped today, kind of thing. And so that's a concern. And this river was the reason that the Pueblos came here. And it's the reason that the Spanish came here, and it's the reason the Americans came here. And it should have been sacred, I equate it to the Ganges in India. This is a sacred river, and yet we've allowed it to basically go dry. So the good news is, in 2012, Santa Fe City Council passed a Living River Ordinance that allowed up to 1,000 acre-feet of water to pass on down the river if they have 100% storage in the reservoirs and snowpack. And they measure that, so April 1st, so that's their gauge for the rest of the year. They go on April 1 year. So that's a big deal, because there's about 5,000 acre-feet on average in the last, I'll say, 40 years that comes out of our upper watershed. So about 20% of that, they said, that belongs to the river. Pretty cool. Since then, water utility staff they're always trying to figure out, this is like, this can't be. This is, they're trying to get water to the treatment plants so they can get it to us. That's their job. And so much of the fight that goes on is not so much the snowpack, but it's really the reservoir levels and some of this stuff that we try and deal with them about too, and where the water flows. Water theoretically flows in the lowest part of a canyon or a watershed for surface water. That's sort of natural definition. And I was talking with someone, Neil Williams just was telling me that. Neil Williams is a hydrologist. It's been around for about 25 years here in Santa Fe. Has worked on a lot of projects, including Mary Page Grant, the founder of the Watershed Association. But anyway, he has always said, it's real simple, Andy. The water's in the lowest part of the valley, And so what happens is that as the different bypass ditches have been built and acequia ditches, all of a sudden the water is flowing through them. And are those the river? No. So it's a real challenge to try and define where the riverbed is often. A couple other things too is that 2007, Santa Fe River was named the most endangered river in America. I don't know if you knew that. American Rivers named it that. And it was because of what we still see going on now, where of course the lower river, it gets very little flow. Mrs. Romero Pike used to talk about going swimming in the river in Agua Fria when she was a girl. She's about 80 now, I think, maybe even 90. But so can you imagine 80 years ago? The other challenge to our river, again, America's most endangered river, is our aquifers. So after World War II, they came back with these wonderful things called electric pumps. So they were able to really pump our aquifers, and our aquifer levels dropped 40 feet in 40 years. So now with the new city utility water plan, with the Buckman direct diversion and the upper watershed and our wells as sort of three primary areas of sources of water, they're able to rest the wells. And just use, this past year, just use the watershed water and the Buckman direct diversion water. Buckman direct diversion water comes from Colorado River Basin, we call it San Juan Chama, because it's the San Juan River and flows into the Chama River, flows into the Rio Grande, we pull it out. And to give you an idea, last year, that was about 50% of our water was coming from that source of water. A real challenge. And this year, it's also 50%. Last year, we were using the wells a lot more. This year, much less, although currently we're using them. But it's mostly a function of making sure that everything's operating correctly, and they figure they can. So, but the notion the city water utility has is to try and raise that aquifer level. And of course, and we go on that too, because all of a sudden, as you raise the aquifer levels, all of a sudden we may get flows in the river and natural flows. There are a few springs around still. Right about here is one, so you know. That's why they built the Palace of the Governors. There was a spring right here. And so if we can get these flowing back again, that's our insurance policy against those extreme drought years. So I'm gonna just throw in one other thing too, and then we can open it up. But the idea of people, especially school kids, often ask us, so where's the river? Where'd the river go? Well, it went into pipes. It flowed out of Santa Fe Lake, flows down the river, goes into pipes in the water treatment plant, and goes to our taps, and then we drink it. So the river is in all of us. As we go through our day, we're the river. Your time, I really appreciate it too. Right.